Now, British Prime Minister Theresa May is currently in cabinet talks as she explores ways to tackle the Brexit deadlock. This comes after members of parliament could not reach a majority in the four alternatives of a withdrawal plan from Monday's indicative votes. So what happens next? Jeremy Cape, a partner and head of the Brexit team at Squire Patton Boggs LLP, joins me to discuss this story. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
It's great to be back in Lagos, Ken.
Please, can you first explain, and tell us what this latest state of play is with Brexit?
Well, I'll give it a go. I mean, as your viewers will probably know, the UK should have left the EU last Friday, but we couldn't really get our act together in time, so they've granted us a short extension to the 12th of April to try and decide on a way forward. Now, Theresa May had negotiated a withdrawal agreement with the EU last year. That so far has not been able to pass Parliament. It's lost 3 times with historically bad losses for a government. Theresa May may try and bring that back again, but it looks unlikely that it's going to be able to pass. So Parliament tried to take control of the Brexit process, and as you mentioned in your introduction last night, following on from some indicative votes last week, they tried to come up with a solution to Brexit that a majority within Parliament could get behind. They failed to do that, so as things stand at the moment, the UK will, as a matter of law, leave the EU on the 12th of April under a so-called hard Brexit.
Okay, but so there's a lot happening here with the hard and soft Brexit, but can you break that down and make people, viewers, understand, what it means on both sides?
Sure. So a hard Brexit is a Brexit under which the UK leaves without having ratified a withdrawal agreement, and it immediately then becomes a third state in relation to the EU. It then ceases to have any trade agreements that the EU currently has unless it can agree to roll those over, and it hasn't successfully managed to do that. It has to apply tariffs to imports from the EU, and there then becomes quite a lot of friction at the border. And the big question, the thing that has been such a challenge for Brexit to date, the question of the Irish border and trying to keep that free of infrastructure. So that's your hard Brexit. A soft Brexit isn't really a term of art. What it means is that there are a variety of options whereby the UK can have a closer relationship with the EU. So that could mean entering into a customs union or having some sort of customs arrangement like Turkey does, or it could mean having membership of the single market in the way that Norway does, or it could be a combination of two, which then makes it look very much like the UK is, for all intents and purposes, an ongoing member of the EU. It just no longer has any say in the decision-making process.
All right, then I'd like to look at the implications for Nigeria, whether it's a hard Brexit or a soft one.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, if, let's suppose we get the UK ratifying a withdrawal agreement, at that stage the UK goes into a transition period under which it, for most purposes, is still a member of the EU. During that time, the UK could look to identify what it wants to be after Brexit. This is the big gap so far in the debate. We're spending all the time debating how we leave the EU. We're not spending any time discussing what we're going to do when we've left it. I think the hope would be, for many, both in Nigeria and in the UK, that the UK uses its freedom outside the EU and its desire to look beyond the EU, to look globally, to look at Africa. Of course, the Prime Minister did visit Nigeria and other African countries last year, to try and see ways in which we can work together to trade in a way that we haven't been able to do with the EU, where you have a number of member states who have different interests in terms of trade negotiations. So that's the hope. The reality may be a little bit different.
All right, then, but she's in cabinet talks right now, and it's going to span quite a long time. But What credible, propositions, can we get out of these talks, that will end this impasse?
Well, if I knew that, I probably wouldn't be here right now. I'd be telling the cabinet how to do it. It's very hard to say. There are some, and there seem to be, from reports, a number in the cabinet who think that actually a no-deal Brexit, a hard Brexit, is the best option, and that would mean the UK doesn't pay the money to the EU. It's a third country, and then it can start negotiating and ratifying trade agreements straight away. Now, the problem with that is most at least of the economic indicators and predictions suggest that that would have a very bad effect on the economics in the UK, but also in the EU. That could have a knock-on effect for countries like Nigeria, because there could be a reduced demand for their products. I think, on the other hand, a customs union, UK having a customs union, has some risks as well. It's very popular, or at least fairly popular in Parliament, to have a customs union, but then that does deny the UK the ability to seek to do the trade deals and having to do those through the EU.
All right, let me read a quote from Michel Barnier, and let me find your thoughts on what he says. He's saying, a long extension to the UK's current 12th April exit date carries significant risk for the EU, and that a strong justification will be needed before the EU would agree. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I think he's right. There is generally an assumption that if the UK asks for an extension, a long extension, it had its 3-week extension, that if the UK asks for a longer extension, that the EU will agree to that. I think the EU is rather more concerned about a no-deal Brexit than they sometimes let on. Certainly Angela Merkel has been showing more vocal concerns about that. But there is this risk of contamination. Brexit is taking up huge bandwidth, not just in the UK, but also in the EU. There's also the concern that almost certainly the UK would have to participate in the European parliamentary elections in May, and you don't know quite how that's going to end up with the rise of the hard right in other parts of the EU, and who might end up getting elected to the Parliament, and what the EU could do as an ongoing member in terms of sabotaging the workings of the EU.
All right, then we'll keep our eyes and see how this plays out. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I've been speaking with Jeremy Cape. He's a partner and head of the Brexit team at Squire Patton Boggs LLP.